They thought I was just an old woman they could push aside, until the day the judge said my name and the entire courtroom froze. If my daughter hadn't betrayed me, no one would have discovered the secret my husband left behind, the secret that destroyed their plan. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just walked into court and ended their entire plan with one document. I remember the exact moment the courtroom froze, the way even the air seemed to hold its breath as I stepped inside. My granddaughter clutching my arm, while my daughter, once the light of my life, rolled her eyes and whispered something ugly into her husband's ear. And then, just when I thought humiliation was going to be the theme of the day, the judge lifted his head, his gaze stalling mid-sentence, his expression cutting through the noise like a knife dipped in ice. And he murmured, almost disbelieving, "Is that her?" And suddenly the entire room went silent, as if everyone instinctively understood that something far bigger than a family dispute had just walked in. No one in that courtroom knew who I truly was, not until that very second. Not until my past and their betrayal collided in the same breath, because I had spent most of my life living quietly, invisibly, the way mothers and grandmothers often do when they sacrifice everything for the people they love. My name is Evelyn Hart. I am 72 years old, and until a few months ago, I was simply a retired seamstress who baked pies on Sundays, watered her tulips every morning, and kept her late husband's coffee mug chipped on the rim next to mine at the kitchen window, as if he might walk in any moment. I never imagined I would one day sit in a courtroom fighting to keep the home where I raised my daughter, where I held my husband's hand as he took his last breath, where every wall still echoes with laughter from a time before greed and pride hollowed out the people I once loved. But here I was, dragged into a war I never started, cornered by the very daughter whose college tuition I cleaned offices at night to pay for, whose prom dress I hand-stitched until my fingers ached, whose wedding cake I baked myself because she wanted it to taste like childhood, and I gave her everything I had, even when her husband, Gavin, started treating me like a burden, invading my home with that oily confidence of men who mistake arrogance for intelligence. They came to me on a gray October afternoon, the day I had made chicken noodle soup, her favorite since she was 8, and sat me down at my own kitchen table to inform me, with rehearsed politeness, that the house I had lived in for 4 decades was too much for me now, that they had found a perfect assisted living facility with activities for someone my age. And I remember how the room spun, how every memory pinned to those walls felt like it was being peeled away with their words. And I kept waiting for my daughter, Lena, to soften, to reach for my hand, to remember who I was to her. But she only looked at me with that cold, brittle pity people use when they've already decided you're in their way. They claimed it was for my safety, that I was forgetful, that I needed help, even though the only time anything was forgotten was when they forgot to visit, forgot holidays, forgot birthdays unless a gift was involved. And I sat there listening to them talk about packing up my life like I was a tenant who'd overstayed her lease. And something inside me cracked, not loudly like glass, but quietly, like a seam splitting in an old dress, small enough to ignore at first, but big enough to tear everything apart in time. They left that day, leaving my soup untouched, the flowers on the table wilting, and a coldness in the room that settled into my bones. And for the first time in my life, I realized my daughter did not see me as her mother anymore. She saw me as an obstacle to property she believed was rightfully hers, property she planned to take with the help of her manipulative husband, who walked through my home like a prospective buyer, tapping walls, inspecting windows, pretending concern while calculating profit. But fate has a strange way of balancing scales. And grief, my oldest companion since my husband died, sometimes hides blessings inside its sorrow. Because when they returned with a real estate agent and legal papers to pressure me into signing over my home, I stumbled upon something my husband had hidden away, a locked file beneath old tax documents, opened only with a small key tucked inside his favorite book. And in that file was the truth that changed everything. My husband was not just a quiet, modest mechanic. He had invested quietly for years, purchased rental properties, acquired shares in companies including the very firm where Gavin worked, And most importantly, he left all of it, every single piece, to me, with a clause stating our daughter would inherit only if she showed respect and care toward me, a clause she had shattered the moment she tried to push me into a nursing home. There I sat at our kitchen table, reading the will through tears that weren't of pain but of awakening, realizing the man I had loved had built a fortress around me long before he died, trusting that someday I might need protection from the very child we had raised. Fueled by heartbreak and a fire I didn't know I still possessed, I gathered every lease agreement, every bank statement, every deed, every share certificate, and laid them neatly in a folder. And when they arrived again, boxes in hand, movers behind them, ready to strip my home, I sat calmly with my chipped mug and waited. Their arrogance evaporated when I placed the deed to their rental building, the one they lived in and believed belonged to a corporation, directly on the table, with my name printed on it in bold ink. And for the first time in years, I saw fear flicker in Gavin's eyes, a brief but satisfying tremor that told me the tide had turned. I told them they had 30 days to vacate, that I would not be bullied, that I would not sign anything, that any further attempts to remove me from my home would be met with lawyers and the police. And when Gavin tried to intimidate me, raising his voice, insisting I was mentally declining, I calmly informed him that any false claim would result in an immediate lawsuit funded, ironically, by dividends from the company that employed him. He left shaking with fury. And Lena, my child, my once beloved girl, collapsed into tears, apologizing weakly, saying she was pregnant, saying she was overwhelmed, saying Gavin had convinced her I was unsafe. I told her she could stay one night, and that redemption was a path, not a plea, and she nodded like a chastened child. But Gavin did not give up. He stormed my apartment building the next week, screaming that I had kidnapped his wife, insisting on seeing her, trying to intimidate the staff until I put my lawyer on speakerphone, and Gavin learned, in front of a lobby full of witnesses, that trespassing on property owned by the woman he tried to displace was not in his best interest. He left humiliated, but not defeated. And soon after I was served papers, he was suing me for psychological manipulation, financial coercion, interference in family matters, and demanding access to his unborn child, which would have terrified me once. Upon a time, but not now, not after everything I had endured, not after discovering that strength does not vanish with age, it condenses. At the courtroom entrance, Lena trembled beside me, while Gavin strutted like a man walking toward a victory he had rehearsed in his head, filing exaggerated affidavits, twisting facts, painting himself as a victim of a powerful, vindictive mother-in-law. But the moment I stepped inside, the judge recognized me not as a defendant or a confused old woman, but as the former assistant to a legendary family court judge whom he had studied under 30 years earlier, a woman who had once told him, "Look at the people before you look at the paperwork," a lesson he apparently never forgot. From there, Gavin's case collapsed piece by piece. The threats he sent Lena, the recordings of him plotting to declare me incompetent, the neighbor testimonies, the evidence of attempted forced displacement, the lease agreements proving he lived in a property owned by me, not the other way around. I watched his confidence drain like water through cracked tile. His attorney scrambling while the judge issued a restraining order barring him from approaching me or Lena, dismissed his claims entirely and ordered all court fees to be paid by him. When the gavel fell for the final time, Lena cried not from fear but from release, from the weight of finally choosing herself, choosing her unborn child, choosing truth. Weeks passed, seasons shifted, and Gavin's presence faded into a distant shadow as Lena rebuilt her life, learning to breathe without someone else's voice dictating every thought she had. I used part of my inheritance to create a small foundation, House of Grace, a quiet refuge for elderly women pushed out of their homes by children who forgot what love meant. And in helping them, I rebuilt parts of myself I thought had died. When Lena's baby girl, Mira, was born, I held her tiny hand and knew with absolute certainty that generational pain would end with me, not pass through me. I never heard from Gavin again. Though rumors surfaced bankruptcy, relocation, job loss, all consequences of choices he made while underestimating a woman who had survived far worse than him. Now, years later, I sit in a sunlit kitchen that still smells faintly of tulips and fresh bread, watching Mira draw flowers on scraps of paper, and Lena, stronger, steadier, packs food boxes for women at the shelter. And people often ask me, Evelyn, after everything they did, was the revenge worth it? And I always smile. Because the truth is simple. Revenge was never the goal. Respect was, boundaries were, freedom was. The destruction of their plans was simply the natural consequence of their own choices. The real victory is this quiet life, this safe home, this laughter, this peace that no one gets to take from me ever again. So if you are listening, wherever you are, remember this. Sometimes the fiercest warriors are not the loudest or the youngest, but the older women who have spent a lifetime bending until one day they decide to stand straight, and when they finally do, the world has no choice but to step back.